All right. Good afternoon, everybody. We'll give just 30 more seconds here. Let everybody jump in. So, we've got a couple of people joining. Well, we can go ahead and get started as those continue to join. We thank you for joining here, the webinar today about how to build a budget aligned with your mission. My name is Connor McClure with Martus, and I know we have Jake Douglas on as well with Church Finance Pros. We'll introduce ourselves completely here in a second. But first thing we want to do is just go over a couple housekeeping items, okay? So always, feel free. You can maximize the window here for just making it easier to view. There is the ability to put in questions as well. We're going to do Q&A here at the end. So go ahead, feel free as we're moving along here. If some questions pop up. And we already got a couple that have been entered. So feel free to keep typing those in and we'll tackle those at the end of today. And then also, there are going to be resources that are located in the related content area. So you can access that for our resources today. Okay. Do want to go ahead and kick us off, though, just to introduce ourselves a little bit. My name is Connor McClure. I am the Senior Account Executive here at Martus. My background, I have 8 years, 8+ years actually now in the FP&A and accounting space. I used to be an auditor for Grant Thornton back in the day. I've done all sorts of different roles in FP&A, and I have actually been here now at Martus for 3 years. A little bit about me. I have a wife now of going on 4 years, and I have a 20-month-old baby boy who is amazing. So that's just briefly about myself. Jake, would you like to introduce yourself a little bit?
Yeah, that's awesome. You've got the young kids. My kids are a little bit older here, at 7 to 18 years old, which as I was writing that made me feel a little bit old, not going to lie, thinking about 17 years serving churches. Anyway, my name is Jake. I'm the founder of Church Finance Pros. I know a lot of you in the audience already know at least who I am from being part of our Facebook group or our email list, but excited to serve you guys and share with you some of our budgeting wisdom and experience. I've worked with mega churches down to church plants for both on staff for about 10 years. And then after that, mostly in a consulting role, helping with all things finance, whether that's writing budgets or operational items like just the day-to-day accounting, payroll, bill pay, donor management, all of that. So excited to share with you guys today what we've learned.
Awesome. Well, a little bit of agenda for today. So what we're going to tackle, first thing we're going to do is we're going to identify some of the inefficiencies, I guess you would say, that come up whenever you're doing manual, budgeting through your Excel spreadsheets, your Google Sheets. We're also going to talk about, though, some we put here more modern budgeting practices or principles to reduce your time that goes into the budget cycle, and also how do we align our budget with our mission, right? And so we'll talk through that. Finally, we're going to discuss how to collaborate well between our ministry leaders, our department heads, and then our finance team. We'll go through some new different ways that you're able to build budgets that allow you to be a little bit more agile, whether that's through the budgeting process or even being able to do throughout your year possibly a working budget, but how that leads you into better decision-making processes. A little bit about Martus, just so y'all are aware, we've been around now for 18 years, okay, going on our 18th year. We have over 1,300 customers, integrated with over 25 different ERPs. We serve, though, churches and nonprofits. So 95% of our customer base is made up of churches and nonprofits. We were originally founded out of Greenville, South Carolina. Our first client was a church, and that's who we serve still today. Jake, do you want to talk a little bit about who y'all are at Church Finance Pros?
Yeah, absolutely. So Church Finance Pros, we're a little bit younger. We're celebrating our 7th year in 2026. So we've been around as Church Finance Pros. Before that, we were serving churches along with other for-profit companies, and decided to just focus only on churches. So been around longer, but 7 years as Church Finance Pros. We serve churches from the startup phase or pre-launch all the way up to those multi-million-dollar, multi-site location churches. And we focus on pretty much anything that a church needs in the financial space, with the exception of right now, we're not doing audits, but any of the day-to-day accounting, technology migrations, payroll, all of that kind of stuff we help handle. And then we do a lot of consulting with the churches that we work with as well. In addition to Church Finance Pros, we also recently launched the Church Operations Toolkit, which I just wanted to highlight for a second because we have a ton of free tools inside there, and we're continually building that out as well. So there are already some tools in there that will help with the budgeting process. So if you haven't already joined that, check that out at churchoperationstoolkit.com. You can join our free group on the platform called School. There's a link on the website for churchoperationstoolkit.com, so it's the easiest way to get there. You can join us there and check out some of the free resources, and we'll be continuing to add new resources to that, especially on the budgeting side in the coming weeks and months. So I get to jump into some of the content with you guys, which I'm super excited about. Budgeting is one of those areas that I kind of nerd out on. And I could talk about this for hours. So I'm going to try to keep this as concise and brief as possible. But what I wanted to do is highlight a little bit of how I see churches normally do the budgeting process, kind of highlight some of the biggest issues that come from that, and then talk about a little bit better way to do the budgeting process that can really maximize your efficiency as a church in writing the budget, but then also maximize your impact. Because one of the things that I notice with churches is it's really easy to operate from a scarcity perspective. And we spend so much time thinking about how we can cut our budget and how we can make sure that we're controlling our spending. We don't spend as much time in the church space thinking about how we can grow our budget. And so some of the things that I want to share with you today are going to help, I guess, guide intentionality in your budget writing process. So normally what we see with churches when they're writing kind of that less intentional budget, what they're doing is either just starting from last year and kind of copying and pasting. That's a very common budget strategy. Just do what we did last year. We're just going to take the same budget and copy it over this year and use it. That's okay. In some years, that's helpful when you've got years with minimal change, but it's not really going to help you move your organization or move your church in the direction of your vision or your mission. And we're kind of using the words vision and mission interchangeably in this, though some churches will call it one or the other, or maybe have both. But a lot of times, if you're going to write your budget from scratch, what it looks like, and what we see all the time, is that you ask your staff to contribute what they want to see out of their budget. They put them on worksheets. Sometimes those worksheets are standardized. Sometimes churches will have staff just submit their budget worksheets in whatever way the staff wants to. The finance person or the executive director will usually bring all of those worksheets together and kind of compile them into one total amount and see how much the budget request summed up to. When you do that, you usually will find that the staff requests well exceed whatever you were projecting for income or available funds for the year. So then you go through the process of trimming the budget. You go back to your staff and ask, what can we cut? They kind of rework their budgets and slice and dice things, and then send you revised worksheets or let you know what to take out. You compile it again, and you realize that you're probably still over budget. The cuts that were made were usually not drastic enough. And that's because in a church, at least, most of your budget is really compensation. Normally around 50% of the budget is compensation. So when you send the budget back to your ministry leaders to cut you're usually cutting very minimal parts of your budget anyway. So it's really hard to gain some traction. And then the church will just rinse and repeat. Now, we did this at one of the churches that I was on staff at, where we would go through these budget cutting meetings with our most expensive team members, like our highest paid department leaders would all get in this room together. We actually, I didn't come up with the name, but someone called it the war room, which I understand has a different connotation in churches, with being more about spiritual warfare and prayer. But they called it the war room, and getting together and kind of like fighting for who gets what in the budget. And it actually led to kind of an unhealthy budgeting culture when that was the case, because everyone felt like they had to fight to keep the items they wanted in their budget. And ultimately, it just was an inefficient use of time and an expensive use of time for the staff at a larger church anyway. So we rinse and repeat. And then finally, once you get that number down to where it needs to be, then you submit the budget for approval to the leadership, whether that's a board or the congregation in some cases, and then kind of finalize and implement your budget. So that's the normal process. And there's definitely some problems with this approach. Generally, the staff requests are more than what's needed. The staff is the one that sets the vision for resource management when you do it that way, because generally the staff are just contributing, saying, this is what we want for our ministry. And so it actually perpetuates the siloing of ministries, and they're each working toward their individual ministry visions rather than the vision of the church as a whole. You also don't get clarity on what is new addition to the budget for requests versus what was existing in the budget already. And it can be a demoralizing, and it can also waste a lot of staff time. In fact, we actually had a request from the elders back when we used to budget this way at a church that I was on staff with. The elders said, please stop telling the staff that we're asking them to make these cuts, because it was so demoralizing. And the staff was like, now I have to go back. I already did my budget worksheet. I have to go back and do it again. And then sometimes a third time just to get it down to a manageable amount. And then when you're doing that, anytime you're writing a budget and then going back and making cuts, it tends to be that you're going to leave some fat in the budget as well. So there will be things where this isn't a frequent occurrence, but you take an example like camp, right? In order to run camp, you have to have a budget for buses, and you're going to have a budget for camp shirts and a budget for the actual event center. All of these things are part of the budget, and they might be in different places. And when you start cutting different things, sometimes you will leave parts of one thing in a budget that you're not actually going to spend or going to be able to spend on when you've cut another part out. So you get fat that's left in the budget that way, which is also kind of a problem with this approach. So here's the approach that I recommend. And it's kind of, if you've heard the analogy with the jar and the rocks, it's easier to put the larger rocks in first into the jar, and then the smaller rocks, and then the sand. And you're able to fit everything in a jar that way, as opposed to if you put in the sand first, you're going to run out of room for your bigger rocks. With budgeting, it's kind of the same approach. What you want to do is always start with the vision from the leadership. Admittedly, this is a surprisingly large challenge in most churches, because a lot of church leaders, especially at the senior pastor level, haven't really spent a lot of time to think through what they want to see in the next 1 year, 3 to 5 years, or 3 to 5 years. And that actually hurts the ability of the staff to write a budget that's aligned with your vision or mission. So one of the resources in our church operations toolkit that's available to you is a vision strategy sheet to start the budgeting process. So it kind of asks those questions like, what are the key things or the big rocks that really have to be done this year in order to move your vision forward? Those are the big rocks we're going to put in the budget first. And then from there, we're going to pre-balance the budget based on that vision. So for example, if your church is going to be focusing on bringing in new young families and wanting to really invest in that demographic, then your budget needs to probably resource or spend more resources on your children's ministry department, or some of those areas where families are going to be coming to your church and then maybe sticking around or not, depending on how their kids are treated and how their kids like the experience. Because As a parent of 4 kids, I know that if your kids do not want to be somewhere, it's going to be miserable for you to be there too. And so, one of the things that a church that's going to have a vision to reach young families needs to prioritize is children's ministry. Are we making sure that the environment is engaging for kids? Are they getting the appropriate lessons? Is our curriculum going to be what the kids are needing for this season? And is the curriculum going to be focused on kids who maybe don't have a family that's developed a strong spiritual foundation, right? So those are the vision questions that we need to answer in order to properly write the budget. So once the budget is really is focused on the vision first, then you can pre-balance the budget when you're looking at the allocation of funds. Now, this is probably one of the most powerful strategies to writing an efficient budget, because instead of having all of the ministries just dream up whatever they can and then having to go back and make cuts, what you can start with is actually assigning an amount to each ministry department. And you can do all that work up front to say, here's the amount of our budget based on our income projections. Here's the amount that children's ministry should have to work with. Here's the amount that youth ministry should have to work with, and the worship ministry. When you do that, you know that the staff is going to return a number that you can accept, basically. That what I would tell the staff is that if you keep your budget in this number or below this number, then you know you're not going to have to go back and rework it, right? So you instantly cut off all those meetings, all of the rework that the staff has to do just by pre-balancing the budget and giving your budget or your department ministries a target to work for. Now, in that process, there needs to be some fluidity, because you could assign a number and someone might come back to you and say that's completely unrealistic for what you as a leadership is asking us to do, right? So what I do when I'm pre-balancing is I will take an amount of the budget and I will actually set that aside as margin. Now, in a growing church, that's really easy to do because you can set benchmarks based on the prior year. If you know you're going to grow in revenue, then you've got some built-in margin that you can use to be strategic with, and then start those targets similar to where they were last year. In a church that's struggling or seeing some decline in giving, then there's some other strategies that I would employ to build that margin in. And that's something that I'm always happy to have some conversations with you and your church about, if that's helpful. Once you do that, then staff can fill in the detail work of the budget. Because they have been communicated the vision up front, you can also challenge them to think through as they write their budget, not just what are the things they need, the graham crackers and goldfish of the budget, but what are the things that they can do in their ministry activities that are actually going to move the vision of the church forward, right? So we're kind of aligning all the wheels on the car to go the same direction in advance. Now we can actually drive forward as an organization. That alignment is really critical. So then the staff can fill those in. The other, I think, top tip that I would have is, with that margin that you set aside, that's going to be your most strategic use of financial resources. So, for example, if we take like 90% of the budget and it's allocated to the departments to fill in whatever they need to do in their budget, some of the essential activity funding, then let's take that other 10%, let's say, and that's going to be used for addition requests. So while the staff, we challenge them to think through like what they can do with the amount that they're given and to return a budget that's within that limit, we don't want to say that there's no room for them to also dream a little bit. What we want to do, though, is we want to separate those dreams from the bare minimum budget that they need to have presented, right? So then they can say, here are some things that I believe God's put in my heart to invest in as a ministry, or sometimes there's just some big needs that we need to cover. Those types of things, we will gather up that list as a separate process. Those are budget addition requests. And then the leadership can work with the staff and evaluate which of those budget addition requests should be approved. The real power of this is that it allows you to not just fill in your whole budget with a bunch of little things that feel essential, but it allows you to use your your not just margin, but use your whole budget to accomplish the things that are actually going to move the needle forward. There's some additional benefits of that too, even for the things that you don't approve, because you may come up with a budget addition request list that's $500,000 or $1 million because you have a team that loves to dream or has big vision. That's great. And you may not be able to do all those things in 1 year, but it also gives you a little bit of an idea of what the staff has in mind, what kind of vision God might be calling you guys toward in the future. And it gives you some awareness of some of the big ticket items that may be coming down the line as well. For example, like if you need a new snowplow at your church in a cold environment, right? If you're going to need to repair a vehicle or get a new snowplow, you may not fund that in 1 year, but at least you know that it's in the request list and it may come up. So you're going to have fewer surprises in that process as well when you have an avenue for staff to request those budget additions beyond the bare minimum that they're going to eventually get to anyway. So that's kind of the two main things that I would say: pre-balance the budget and then create that margin for the addition request. Those are going to be two things that really help align your budget with your vision. When you do it this way, you cut out a lot of the problems that we mentioned earlier. Staff requesting more than what's needed. They don't, because they're given that direction up front on what their target is. They're not just shooting at a blank canvas here, right? So they're going to come back with a budget that's already pre-balanced. And you know there's going to be minimal adjustment or cutting needed in that process. The staff isn't setting the vision. The leadership is setting the vision, and the staff is actually aligning with that vision in their budget writing process. You get clarity on the new items because those come through the budget additions process and through those requests, and they're approved based on the strategic value of the idea or the request. And then the staff isn't wasting time and feeling demoralized because they get a challenge to be creative, to get their budget to what it needs to. They get an avenue to dream. They don't have to keep redoing the same work over and over again. So you'll create a much healthier budgeting process. And then, of course, you can deal with some of those common questions or nuances, like what happens with the budget if I don't spend it all, right? The spended, like if you don't use it, you lose it. Right, you can deal with those kinds of cultural things, and they have a much smaller impact in how you structure that. And I see churches go both ways with those types of things. I have recommendations. That's for another day. And then you keep a lot of the fat out of the budget as well when you write the budget this way. And then, of course, there's tons of ancillary benefits that are not just solving problems that exist in the old budget writing process, but you get additional benefits in here that the leadership actually is forced to lead and gets to lead the way that it's designed, instead of what's that phrase, the tail wagging the dog, so to speak. The leadership is going to be leading, and it challenges you to think ahead and to think big picture as a leadership team. Resources are directed toward the vision, so you get ministry synergy when all the ministries are looking at the same vision, planning to move the same things forward. And it really reduces the competitiveness that can sometimes arise when people are fighting for resources, because everyone on the staff team would understand why maybe this year children's ministry is getting additional investment or additional funds to use, or this year the worship ministry is getting more because they're going to need to replace a soundboard or a projector or another big ticket item, because they all understand the vision and where they're going, and you start to work as a team that way. And then the time commitment from staff is significantly less. I mean, a budget with this process can be written in just a couple weeks. If you like, I would give the staff about a 2-week window to do their work, which is most of the process. The other steps could really be done in just a few days, and you don't have to keep going back to the staff and trying to figure out where to cut. So a much shorter budget writing process there. So those are the top picks that I would have for how to align your budget writing process with your vision. I just want to let you guys know that there's support available if you guys need help rewriting your process or working on the budget, or just want to get coached through this. We can help you at Church Finance Pros. You can hop on our website and book a call that way. or if you need any other kind of financial support, we're there for you. And then, like I mentioned, in the church operations toolkit, we're going to be adding more resources as well. But one of the resources that is going to be really powerful as well is using the right tools with this process. And as Connor mentioned, a lot of times we're using spreadsheets, which are going to be prone to error, and formulas get messed up. It can be sometimes hard to duplicate when you add or remove different ministries. And so Martus has an amazing tool for budgeting that includes compensation budgeting. And I'm going to let Connor spend some time going through that and kind of walking you through what Martus looks like on the inside. So Connor, hop in there.
Awesome. Thanks, Jake. Real quick before I share my screen, just kind of everything that we do in total. So we're budgeting. We do what we call personnel budgeting, which is the payroll budget. And then we tie it all together with budget versus actual reporting, and then allow you to be able to do forecasting as well. So whether that's scenario forecasting, multi-year planning, even cash flow forecasting, it's a full FP&A tool. All right. Now I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and we'll actually take a look here in Martus. Okay. So if you guys can see my screen, all right, here, what we're looking at here is going to be the Martus welcome screen. This is what you would see whenever you actually log into Martus. Now, I am logged in as an admin user, just meaning I have access to be able to see and do everything here within Martus. I will talk today, though, about how can you restrict access for your ministry leaders, your department heads, and what can they see, what can they do based off of different permissions that you set for them. Now, for today's demonstration, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start off in our planner section here, which is where we actually build our budgets. And then I'll wrap up with a couple quick reports in our dashboard section, which is where we look at those budget versus actual reports and any dashboards. I'm not going to touch on personnel budgeting today. We'll talk about at the end, though, if we want to do a personalized demo, talk about how we can get you access and be able to do that for you. Okay. But I do want to discuss at the top, like I said, there's a couple different ways you can restrict user access throughout Martus. There's two main ways here through user setup. So I'm going to use this gentleman, Ed Dorsey, and I'm going to start off here with his permissions, or what I call Martus configuration. So we look here for Ed. He's given access to the dashboard section and the planner section, but he does not have access to personnel budgeting. So in Ed's case, whenever he were to log in, personnel budgeting is not even going to exist for him. He won't know it's there. Now, the second way that you can restrict user access through dimension, or through user setup, is by dimensions. Now, dimensions are going to align with your setup that you have in your accounting software. So if you're on QuickBooks, it might be your classes and subclasses. If you're on other tools, it might be your segments or your fields. But all of that will show here for you in Martus, because your accounting software is actually going to be the central source of truth for Martus. So first thing that we're going to see here for Ed is location. The dimensions that I'm using are location, department, and project. That's just what I have set up here in this environment, and you'll hear me refer to that today. So for Ed, he's given access to these two locations, but not these three. And then if I go to department, he's given access to the accounting department, but no other department. So when Ed logs in to build his budgets or look at reports, all he's going to see specifically is the accounting department at those two locations. Now, we're going to give you a high-level feel here, and so we'll start off with a couple budget worksheets. So first thing you're going to see, though, is this worksheet status report. This is where, as an admin, you're able to track and see live where your budget worksheets are at any given point in time. Now, I am going to build my worksheets here by location and then by department. So that's the dimensionality I'm using here. But whenever we go through implementation with you, we would set it up to be whatever your needs are. Now, target column is where you could set a target for your end users. So just letting those ministry leaders or department heads know, hey, how much do they have to spend in their budget that year? Status column is where you're able to track and see live what's open, what's been submitted for review, what's been approved, what's been denied. So where is each worksheet at any given point in time? If your accounting software allows it, we do support statistical accounts here within Martus as well. So like headcount or attendance is one that I've seen tracked as a statistical account. That is just a non-finance account that we allow you to be able to budget by and also even run budget versus actual reports on. And then you'll have your owners and your approvers. Now, you can have it up to 99 approvers in Martus. I know that is overkill. We just wanted to set it to where basically you could have as many as you would like. But what happens is a budget owner is going to go in, they'll complete their worksheet, and they'll hit submit and lock. When they do that, it'll send it out to the first approver in line, just letting them know, hey, this budget worksheet's able to be reviewed. Now, whenever the owner submits it, they do not have the ability to go back in and make any changes to it. Okay. It has to be denied or unlocked for them to do so. That's the version control we set up here within Martus. Now, as an approver, you do not have to send the budget worksheet back. You could go in, make whatever adjustments you would like to, approve it, and it'll just go to the next person in line. So we do offer a hierarchical approval workflow that you're able to set up here in Martus. I'm going to click on this pencil icon, though, and we're going to take a typical look at an end user experience for building budget worksheets. 2 ways to set up your end users. Number one, you could initialize. So this is where I could load in prior actuals. I could do prior budget. Maybe I want to do a combination of both here, right? And then I could increase or decrease my spend and set values. So when I do that, now I have a preset budget worksheet that just allows any end users to go in, make whatever changes they would like to, leave their notes and comments. The second thing that you could do is zero out a budget worksheet. So if you take a zero-based budgeting approach, you could zero it out and basically start from scratch. Ignore these numbers down here. These are pre-built models I have set up in this demonstration. Okay, I'll show you those in just a second. But no matter which way you set up your end users, they will have reference data at their fingertips. So if I click this View Reference Data tab, we store an unlimited amount of historical data. So whether that's actuals or budget numbers, we'll store that for you here in Martus, and we'll actually bring all that in for you through implementation. But in regards to creating your budget, your end users would have the ability to come in here, click and drill down, and you can actually see the transaction detail that's coming over from your accounting software here within Martus. We'll support all transaction fields that you show in your accounting software. We'll bring those in. Maybe you're saying, hey, they don't need to see actuals. They might need to see previous history budgets. No problem. Well, you can click and drill down into any notes and comments that you had in prior years, or also any models that you have built for yourself. Just say, hey, is there anything I might need to carry over from last year to this year? Now, to enter in budget numbers, a couple different ways we could do that. First thing you could do is just like you would in your spreadsheets, you could plug it in at the cell level. But really what all of our clients utilize on this screen is this calculator icon. This is what we call our budget widget tool. Now, through this budget widget tool, I want to bring your attention here. You notice how my adjustment type is preset to be monthly. You can enter in information a bevy of different ways. You can do weekly, bi-weekly, monthly, quarterly, annually. However your end users are most comfortable with entering in their data, however they're providing it to you currently, you could preset it for them that way here within Martus. So I could preset this to be annual, and then an end user could go in, plug in the total number for the year, and it's going to break it up monthly for reporting purposes. I'm going to touch on reporting in just a second. Now, you can hard code your lines if you would like to, leave notes and comments here as well. But one of the tools I always like to cover here is copy existing values. Okay, so you see we got custom spreads that you can do, allocations, but in copy existing values, I want to think of, an account that has some sort of seasonality to it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in here, copy my seasonality source for that account, and then I can increase or decrease my spend. So I'll increase it by 5%, say that's due to inflation, and I'll leave a note. Prior year budget plus 5% for inflation. Now with a click of a button, I'll copy my note down there and I'll hit save. When I do that, my calculator icon turns blue. That just notifies anybody that's looking at this, hey, there's a note that's left there. You could click and drill down to see the notes. You could hover over the numbers to see the notes. And finally, you can also leave notes to this attachments tab. Click choose file, upload as many documents or files as you would like to the worksheet. the one other piece that I do want to highlight today in budget creation is the ability to build models using non-financial drivers. So to do that, we would utilize what we call our special purpose worksheet. So if you saw, I clicked on that arrow icon there, and it is going to pull up here one of our special purpose worksheets that tied to that department's budget worksheet. Okay, this is like the detail behind the budgeted numbers. And if you can see here, I got a travel budget that I built here. Now, these are customizable. You can, build out whatever rows you would like to and create whatever models you would want there. But for purposes here, you can see for my travel budget, I got a number of attendees that are traveling, number of nights they're staying, number of days they're traveling. Then I got my airfare cost, my hotel cost per night, my meal cost per day. Well, that's going to create my totals for me right here, which I have tied going to these preset budget account lines. Now, for your end users that you're saying, well, they would create cell reference errors, broken formulas, all the above. No problem. What you can do for them is build the shell of the model for them here within Martus, and they can plug in their numbers that they know. I'll give a perfect example of this. The church that I attend, they've actually been on Martus now for about 11 years, okay? And our youth pastor, who I'm really good friends with because it was actually the first men's group that I joined when I joined High Ridge about 3 years ago now. He actually utilizes this for building out the youth conference that we put on every year. Now, I can assure you, this gentleman does not have any sort of finance and accounting background. Awesome guy. Numbers do not wake him up in the morning. I can promise you that. But he does utilize this tool here. Well, how he does it is we have a shell built for that youth conference. It was called Frontline last year. And what he'll do is come in here and he'll adjust his numbers. So I'll come in and I'll say, hey, in this case, I got 5 people traveling, not 7. Well, what that's going to do is automatically update the totals and then tie to these preset budget account lines. Okay, so we're automating what you would do in Excel, but also removing human error. There's no such thing as cell reference errors or broken formulas. Now, when we look here, you can also see this line for software subscriptions. That shows $32,000 in January. What all is going in there? Through this tool, I do have the ability to itemize out accounts. So I can come here and say, hey, I got my accounting software, I got Martus, expense tracking system, so on and so forth. So I'll leave notes on my lines, just like I did previously in my other worksheet. And it'll come down here, sum my totals, and concatenate all my notes. Now, I know from experience that one of the things that I've seen used on this is like our tech team. They'll go in and they'll actually build out all the different tools that they're using, and they'll itemize those out that will roll up into accounts. Okay. Now, when I hit post a worksheet, I'm going to go back to the budget worksheet that I was on previously. And you can see here's my software subscription lines. Here's my travel budget showing. Now, as you build out these individual worksheets, they are going to automatically consolidate to what you see here. This is your overall planner summary. This is your consolidated budget. So everything rolls up for you automatically. There's no beautiful formulas tying it all together. It just does it for you. Now, I do want to highlight a little bit how we do reporting here in Martus, okay? Because as you build your budgets out, that's the first step. And then the second thing is, well, how do you actually get people that are tracking against their budgets throughout the year, okay? And in Martus, what I'm going to show you here today are just 2 canned reports. So everything I show you are out of the box. Canned reports are already come ready. And you can see this dashboard here with these visualizations. These are out of the box. Just so you know, you can build any custom reports you would like to, custom dashboards. We offer even an AI report builder tool that you just type in what you want it to create, and it builds it for you. So we make creating reports very, very easy and intuitive to do. But 2 reports that I want to highlight some of the functionality we have built in with here. The first one's going to be through an income statement. And you can see I got 2 months actuals, last month budget, my monthly variance, year to dates, my variance here, annual budget, and what is remaining. Once again, everything that's in blue and Martus is drillable. So I can come, click drill down into any actuals that I have. So maybe there are some variances showing up and you want your ministry leaders to document why those variances have occurred. You can have a column set for notes, which they could go in and do that. The other thing that I want to show, so we've created our budget, but then as we move throughout our year and there's a variance showing, you're not going to remember what that budgeted number was for always. So you could click and drill down into those notes and comments or into those models that you had built just to refresh your memory there. So you don't have to open up your budget, then open up the report. It's all just a click of a button away. And to slice or dice the data here in Martus, you can just click these drop downs. So I can modify my rows. Say I want to look at this by my different departments, and then maybe I want to look at it on an annual basis. You can see here that I have it set to go back 3 years. That's just how I have it preset in my environment. As I mentioned previously, we bring in as many historicals as you would like, and you could back it up to go as far back in your report as you would like as well. Now you can export any report to Excel or PDF from Martus. And the final report that I want to highlight here is a forecast report. So I'm going to take this as if I am the head of department or ministry 100, okay? And I'm an end user. When I look at this, this says, hey, we're through February. So I got 2 months of actuals, 10 months budget remaining. So if I hit my budget for my remaining 10 months, I get this total number here. Compare that to my annual budgeted number, and I got a variance column. Now, red is bad, black is good in Martus. We make it very easy for non-finance and accounting users to tell, hey, am I doing good or do I need to make some changes? Salaries and different pay types. You might say, well, I don't want everybody seeing that. No problem. You could set up restricted accounts within Martus, so therefore they don't show up for the users that you don't want them to. The other thing you could do is restrict users based off drill down permission. So instead of being blue here, this could be grayed out. So maybe they see the total of salaries, but they can't drill down into any further detail. Okay. For your end users, to get them to see what you want them to, it's very easy. Number one, you could set default views for them. So when they log in, maybe you want them to see a dashboard that can show for them there when they log in, or you could save reports for them as well. Okay. We could even set you up with a month end close button. So whenever you finish your month end close, you click on that button, it sends out an email saying, hey, month end close is complete. Please log in and view your reports in Martus. They click the link to log into Martus, and they're either going to see their dashboard set up there or their save reports with blue highlights. So they log in, click on the link. It's going to open that up based off their permissions and their restrictions. Now I will kind of pause on the demonstration here with Martus, and what we're going to do is we are going to turn it back over and going to look at some questions here that we have.
Tackle a couple of these that I was looking at while you're doing the demonstration. So David had a question about changing the budget process when it's suboptimal. He said, assuming your process is suboptimal, is it better to completely overhaul your budget building process in one foul swoop or make incremental changes over time? That's a great question. I would normally iron out the process as much as possible in the first I guess in one fell swoop, as you put it. The reason is a lot of the times the process changes that you need to make are not going to be drastic. A few subtle changes, like what I mentioned before, can make the biggest impact on your budget process. Now, there's a lot of little best practice things that you can change too, and those you can do over time. But if you can do some work up front to pre-balance your budget, like I mentioned, just that one change alone is you're really just kind of flipping the order of operations, and you're going to get a significantly more impactful budget writing process and faster budget writing process. So I would change that as much as you are able to do, recognizing that this is set in a vacuum. I don't know how big your church is, how many staff you're dealing with. And obviously leadership change takes time and takes it's like relationship equity. So if you're in a place that doesn't have a great culture around budgeting, sometimes moving a little bit slower can be valuable there. But I would change as much as possible on the process, and then use the tools to supercharge your budget process. And then Brad, I can tackle Brad's question. He said, have we done any analysis to provide a normal range of how much of a budget is typically allocated toward wages, payroll taxes, and benefits separately or as a combined total? That's a great question. And I would normally consider that to be part of the pre-balancing. So I can share with you some of the best practice that we see with churches. And some of the recommendations depend on your denominational affiliation. For example, like churches in the ARC network, they usually recommend like 30% compensation. I think that's too aggressive personally. From what I've seen, I feel like churches will operate too long with not enough staff resources at that rate. What I've seen is 50% compensation for your budget, and compensation would include all your wages, taxes, benefits, and I would normally include in that any consultants or outsourced contractors that are replacing what would otherwise be a staff person. So that would include potentially accounting support or janitorial, where if you didn't have that person, you would need a staff person to fulfill that function. So 50% is really healthy. If you can get that down a little bit, like in that 40% range, that's great. You're going to be operating lean. When you do that, I would maybe question if staff are being paid enough, if they're getting benefits that make your pay competitive, especially as compared to like not just other churches, but even the corporate world. You can really lose talent that way if you pay too little. And then if you inch up on that like 60% side, then I would probably challenge you to spend a little more time equipping and training and releasing volunteers who can actually do the work of the ministry and not just hiring everything done. So that 60% side, I usually see where churches are paying their entire worship team or their entire children's ministry team. And a lot of times with some solid leadership, you can build volunteer teams for those functions and not need to pay them. So 50% is great. In terms of the rest of your budget, I normally recommend 10% going to outreach or missions causes, 10% going to direct ministry costs like different meetings and meals, curriculum cost, things like that, honorarium and guest speakers would all be included in that. And then a 30% amount going to your facilities and operational costs. So that's the breakdown we normally see with churches. They can provide a healthy budget, and it will really help with the pre-balancing because you know really how much is going to each part of that overall budget. So one of the things that we see with churches as an example is that the outreach ministry might be getting about 5%, but a lot of churches want to expand their outreach to that 10% and kind of be thinking outside the walls. When you do that with your budget, if you know that that's the goal, then this is one of those places where you can kind of put the big rocks in first, and you can say, okay, this year we're going to budget, maybe moving from 5 to 7% of our total budget into the outreach. So that's going to be the pre-balanced allocated amount for outreach to work on in their budget. And so now you've made one step closer to aligning your budget with your vision when you did that. And then the next year you can say, now we're moving from 7 to 8% or 9% or whatever you can tolerate in your budget change until you get to that full 10% of outreach and missions giving, if that was your goal, for example. So that's a couple of the questions that popped out there. Let's see what else we've got. Connor, any questions that popped out?
Dave Smith had a comment. Building a spreadsheet is a great option for small churches, but with growth comes the need to scale the tools required. We should never be afraid to look at the best tool. Yeah, and that's something that I see in my job every single day is speaking to churches and other organizations that you've just outgrown the process. And I can tell you from speaking to someone who's a mentor of mine, he chose to go on Martus when actually their church was really small. And I asked him, it's grown now, and I asked him why, because he was brand new in his role as the executive pastor. I said, well, why did you do that? He didn't just go on Martus. He made a couple changes on the technology side. And he said, well, I knew where I wanted to be And I knew that doing the processes that I had in place today wouldn't help us get there. And so he was planning for the future on that. And that always stuck with me from that side. Brad asked a question. Connor, does Martus integrate with Shelby Next Financials? Yes, we do have obvious integration with Shelby Next. I actually just had a church sign a contract on Friday that was on Shelby, and I have many references of churches that have been on Martus for a long time using Shelby. So happy to connect with you on that, Brad. Jake, I'll let you kind of tackle a couple of them here.
Yeah. Brad asks also about ideas for motivating or helping elder teams transition to a vision-led process that requires them to move from big ideas to the detailed cost, which is a great question. And arguably the biggest challenge to any budget process is the culture and the leadership. It's worth the fight for sure. So a couple of the things. One, the resource that I mentioned that's in the Church Operations Toolkit is a great starting point because it asks some of those vision and philosophical questions, like what are we doing that we need to keep doing? What are the things that we need to stop doing in the next season because they're maybe conflicting or competing priorities with the overall vision? But I would say the best thing you can do is start by inviting people into the conversation. Obviously, leaders have to lead. That's kind of the big point there. So your structure is going to matter in terms of roles and responsibilities for who does what in the budget process. So sometimes with the board or the eldership, if they're the ones that are writing the budget, or you have like a separate committee that's writing the budget, some of the process steps that I had talked about might need to be tweaked a little bit. What I recommend and what I prefer with churches is that the staff who are leading the ministries are the ones that are actually doing the work of writing the budget based on the vision that the leadership has laid out. So the questions that I would invite the elders to give input into would normally be around those pre-balancing and vision items. So you could have a meeting or give them the worksheet and they can kind of go through those questions and then talk about them in the meetings. And most of the times what I say is that the elders should be the ones at least responsible for kind of breaking down your budget pie. So they could be the ones that say, we believe as a church, we want to invest this much in compensation. We want to invest this much in facilities versus outreach, because each church will fluctuate on that a little bit. Like I mentioned, like the ARC network likes to keep their compensation down by 30%. That's just a value for them in how they want to accomplish what they're trying to accomplish as a church and as a network of churches. If you have a church that has a really big production on Sunday morning, and you compare that to a church that's really focused on their small group ministries, and that might be just seasonal changes, they're going to have drastically different budget pies, right? Because a church that's really focused on small group and like deep leadership development, things like that, are going to need to invest in more staff typically, because they're going to need people who are available to invest in small group leaders. They're going to need community pastors. They're going to need a tighter staff to attendee ratio than what a church who's just putting on like the bigger production on Sundays and they have a bigger draw for like reaching out to the community that way. They're going to need to invest more in their worship equipment and in their worship team, but they may not need so many staff people to facilitate that, right? So that can be a big part of that. The leadership should set the vision of that. And as you talk through like, what's the vision, then invite them into those questions about, what are the things that we need to fund this year, for example, in order to accomplish that. Let them weigh in on those big rocks and then let the staff fill in the details there. But most of the time I've found that people are more than willing and eager to be able to weigh in on something and to give their input. So create the environment, create the space for them to have those conversations, and kind of lead them with some of those initial vision questions and just kind of see where that goes. I think you'll be surprised at how well people will jump into that. And then the biggest bridge you'll have to walk over is how does that translate into the actual dollars in the budget writing process? And naturally, the smaller or tighter that budget is, the harder that bridge is to cross. But if you need any help with that, feel free to reach out and I can talk with you more with context about your church specifically. Debbie, the 30% for facilities and operations normally would include the mortgage. If your mortgage is fully paid for, that obviously just can change your budget budget pie, as we call it. That's going to be a pretty drastic change. Typically, what I see is that there's a little higher investment in either staff or direct ministry costs when that happens. So I think it's generally healthier to have a higher investment on the direct ministry costs or outreach, because basically if you're not paying the mortgage, you just have all of that room to work with. Typically a breakdown I would see still probably about 20% in operational cost, and then 10% would normally be around that facilities. If you're on that, if you have a mortgage and you've got like a higher mortgage payment, especially during seasons of expansion, maybe you are building or built a new building and you haven't quite filled it out yet with people, then you're going to see some differences there. But normally like 10-20 breakdown between facilities being 10 and operations being 20, sometimes a good 15-15 split with churches. But if you don't have that mortgage, you're generally going to see higher staff costs or direct ministry costs. So hopefully that answers your question there. As far as projecting giving, I do have some ideas on that. I'll give you my my best strategy. I have some tools for this as well, but big picture, what I normally do is look at a 3-year trend. I think we're far enough away from the disruption of COVID that the trends have kind of stabilized over this last 3 years. So a 3-year trend, I break out the giving minus outliers per month. So I'd look at like January's giving 3 years ago, 2 years ago, 1 year ago. So I can figure a seasonal percentage of what comes in each month to account for that fluctuation. And then I look at the trend of overall growth over those 3 years. And I usually would say, like, let's say you have a church that's growing at like 8 to 10% year over year over those 3 years. I would probably budget income with a conservative approach to that, saying like, let's budget for a 5% increase this year in case it slows down. I wouldn't say like no growth. Sometimes I have churches that are like, we're budgeting for 0 growth, but they've got like a 16% year over year growth. That's kind of hamstringing your own budget process, I feel like. And the beauty of a budget is you can move levers as you go, right? So if you are not meeting your projections, you can make changes. So I would say like maybe like 50 to 70% would be a conservative approach to your year over year growth. And then you can break that out looking at the month. Like January normally represents 8% of our annual giving. February represents 7.5% of our annual giving. And then you can apply that to whatever your projected income total would be for the next year. That's really big picture. Again, I can walk you through any of those details, or anyone on our team can walk you through actually doing those income projections. At my church, that model, when I was doing the budgeting and the income projections for the church, would normally get us within about 1%. So it was a very accurate model to look at that approach. And then, of course, consider any significant impacts on giving. And I remove outliers for like significant special offerings, Christmas, Easter, those types of things when I do the income projections that way. So hopefully that helps. And Brad asks if there's a recommended percentage for reserves for future capital needs. That really depends on a lot of things, like what kind of assets do you have already? So are we talking about just buildings or vehicles as well? And kind of your model. Typically anywhere between 2 and 10% is going to be plenty for that. I would normally err on the side of 2%. I like to be wise and I like to plan ahead, but I like to also make sure that churches are accomplishing their vision. Sometimes I see churches that save and save and save, and they've got millions of dollars in the bank, and they're not growing as a church. And I would rather see that the church is using that money rather than setting it aside where they've got 5 years of emergency fund. I would rather they be using that to actually make a difference and accomplish their vision. So it really kind of depends on what you're looking at. But inside a budget, there's kind of two parts. There's like, how much cash on hand do we need to keep for an emergency or for capital improvements? And then there's how much of the budget should we allocate to be setting aside? That's somewhere between 2 and 10% should be plenty. And an emergency fund can be 3 to 6 months because it's very rare that giving will just stop entirely for a church. Even COVID proved that. So hopefully that's helpful. And then Connor, it looks like there's a question on the pricing for Martus from Sue.
Yeah, so we have different subscription packages. Okay, so we just need to talk to you individually and get an understanding of what functionality your church would need. I can tell you that it starts at about $4,700, and then it can change from there based off of your functionality needs. Okay, Sue. So we'll send out a follow-up email after this, and happy to connect with you and dive into that further. Sarah, I love the ideals set forth here in the product. We're also moving to QuickBooks Online from QuickBooks Desktop. So lots of big changes. Heard what you said about trying to change as much as possible. I could see me having to really hold some hands on the entire budgeting process because there are lots of different personalities when it comes to budgeting. But I still think that more hand-holding right now will give great dividends going forward for every ministry area. And then she asked, agree. So I would say from what I've seen and in my experience in churches in the past as well, that there will always be some level of hand-holding. That's, it's kind of relative. Okay. You obviously want to make sure that the ministry leaders are getting the most out of the funds that you're allocating to them. What we try to do through software is giving the ability to give them oversight, but then also allow them to feel a little bit of autonomy in creating their own budget, right? And so although all those approval processes and everything are there, and you might even preset a budget for them, basically, that they just go in and make small changes to. It's just giving and empowering someone to where they feel a little bit more ownership over it, because I touched on it briefly, but setting the budget is a very, very important thing. And then also it's when you set the budget, it's not just, okay, you create that, and then it's just to the back of your mind. You don't think about it again, right? It's spending against that budget throughout the year. So when you give someone and you empower someone in giving them the ability to create their budget, what you find is that they also are taking a little bit more ownership against their budget throughout the year. So that's just kind of what we've seen.
That's great. And we will have the replay available, Sarah, as well. I think you asked about that. I would agree with Connor on that. And with the hand holding, one of the things that I do with churches, especially when we're writing the budget for the first time, is to just in the 2-week window that we give people to write their budgets, we'd say, like, because honestly, most people wait till the last day to write their budget anyway. So you only give them a month or 2 months to write a budget. 2 weeks is plenty of time to do any research or get quotes for things that they need to. But in that 2 weeks, I would usually carve out 2 days, and I would make myself available for those 2 full days. People can schedule meetings, kind of like open office hours. And the people who want to have the meeting or want to have their hand held will take you up on that. And a lot of times in 1 hour, we can get the entire ministry budget written. And so there would be a church like there's one that I go to every year to help them write their budget. I'm on site with them and I just spend 2 days there. And we basically write the whole budget in 2 days. Every one of their team members just comes in, spends an hour with me. We bust it out together. Some will come with nothing prepared. Some will come with entire ebooks that they wrote about their ministry plan for the next year. It's really, like you said, a drastic difference there. But we usually get through almost every single budget. I take some notes for anything that we need to put a pin in and come back to later. And everyone will feel supported that way. And most of the time they walk in with very little, and by the end, their budget's done. So it's just about them getting a chance to give input. So hold their hands, and I think you'll be better off for it. So in order to respect your guys' time, I want to make sure that we get you guys out of here and on to your days, but the replay will be available for you guys. We'll also, like I said, continue to add resources specifically on budgeting and the church operations toolkit. So check out that. And then keep an eye out for emails from me and Connor with some of the next steps and links to these resources directly in case there's anything that you didn't have a chance to jot down while we were chatting. So Connor, anything else that I missed or you want to add for closing?
No, appreciate Jake. You helping put this on with us, and appreciate all your time as well. Everybody that joined, thank y'all for attending. Thanks for the questions, and hope y'all have a blessed day.
Yeah, likewise. Thanks, guys.